The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Stephen Sakach again here with my co-host Tullio Siragusa and our special guest who we'll introduce in a moment. So leaders who can recognize, regulate, and respond thoughtfully to emotion tend to build stronger teams and healthier cultures. And as businesses grow more complex, the ability to remain grounded and aware becomes a competitive advantage. And so today, we explore how emotional intelligence influences leadership, culture, and results. And Tullio, introduce our guest today.
Absolutely. Our guest today is Coach Quinn Harwood. He is a professional certified coach, speaker, and author of Growth Time, a coaching fable, the clear path to unlocking your best life and leadership. He's passionate about empowering the next gen of mission movers to make real impact, drawing from a journey that includes professional basketball, more than 2 decades in corporate leadership, and thousands of coaching sessions. Coach Q helps emerging and established leaders break through barriers and lead with bold confidence. His mindset is rooted in faith, resilience, and the belief that growth happens when intention meets action. Quinn, welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast. We're excited to have you.
Hey, Tullio, Stephen. I'm just thrilled to be on, just connecting with you both a little bit and knowing the mission you're on and the mission you're moving. That just brings joy to the heart. That next generation of, I call them Zillennials, that Gen Z millennials, and the desire to make an impact in that business and their work and their professionalism is in you and it's in your DNA, and it just moves my heart. So I'm excited to be on, hopefully add some value to your audience and hopefully help them step up their game and next level emotional intelligence and be the great 21st century leaders they're called and created to be. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So Quinn, like 15 years ago, I don't think we were talking about emotional intelligence too much, but so there's a little bit more in the conversation a lot now than it has been, but I think maybe it can still feel abstract to some leaders. In practical terms, what does it look like every day in business situations, would you say?
The core of emotional intelligence is kind of managing your emotions and then really looking at how you read, respond, and influence the emotions of others. I mean, that's the central concept. Then you have different places of self-regulation, you have social skills, you have motivation. They're all part, and the key lead in that is empathy, which I know is big with our group here today, right? So in that space, it's central. It's central to business. The generational patterns have shifted. As I call it, we're out of the do your job generation. And emotional intelligence is important to connect people to the higher purpose and be able to just navigate relationship skills and leadership by managing yourself and managing how you interpret things and your emotions through it. It's just a powerful space. And living through the corporate culture and coaching executives now and leaders that are frontline up to executive, you just know that the shift is important. It's impactful. And it's catching wind. It's going to keep catching waves. And that's a California term for, I know we're out there in California for a little bit, right? It's going to keep catching some waves. And I spent 18 years in California. So there's a little bit of DNA in me, other than my Jersey edge and now my Texas roots. Man, it's cool.
We're on a similar trajectory here. Now, Quinn, what happens when it's missing? What happens to leaders and their team when the emotional intelligence just isn't there?
Well, the end result, like in most businesses, you're concerned with the bottom line. And the bottom line, unfortunately, is when you miss emotional intelligence, the leader, you cause pain, you create pain, and that leads to this world of disengagement. So, Gallup does some great studies, and currently in our market, in our workplace, you got 70% of people that are either actively not engaged or disengaged with the work they do. So there's an impact, and there's 2 layers to it, Tullio and Stephen. You got the impact of missing emotional intelligence on the individual. When you're not growing and you're not evolving and you're not progressing in your own, growth time, what happens is you leave more of a stressed, less energized, connected, fulfilled life. And that's a challenge to you as an individual. But the offset of that is, gosh, you create some really emotional wakes in the workplace with the people you lead. You challenge them to trust you and to think that you value them. And you create all this disruption. And what happens is that you get the burn and the burnout. So the burn is when people you work for, they feel like, wow, I don't know if I can trust this organization or team. I don't know if they really care. And I don't know if they're really committed to me. And then you get the burnout, right? They get sluggish, disengaged, frustrated. And then they just start scrolling their phones, right? And the workload's not done. So it has a huge impact when leaders are just not engaged in their personal growth and involving with emotional intelligence.
In that personal growth side, one of the things that really shows you're growing is your ability to take on perspectives, your ability to really empathize more and more. So I think a lot of leaders, they kind of don't realize that empathy really is you growing in a lot of ways. So you really do need to work on it. And where do they need to start with that? Is it where leaders need to start building this self-awareness with themselves? And if so, how can they build that self-awareness?
Self-awareness is probably the crux of where evolution and growth comes from. And that's the hardest thing for us as people to gain. So the way I look at it and to kind of help frame it, you can look from macro to micro. So becoming more self-aware starts from a macro lens and it kind of digresses or progresses down to the micro. And from the macro perspective, if you're a leader today in a group or organization or you're a CEO, it really starts with tools and resources at a higher level. And so like a feedback 360, Enneagram, a DISC, those assessments from a macro level can help you get some self-awareness of where you sit, the way you interact, the way you communicate, your relationship skills. So they can kind of be a precursor to a macro vision. The next layer, as you kind of continue to come down to self-awareness, we really kind of stems to, okay, now I got that. What is my development plan? And from the CEO down to a frontline team member, if there's not an individual development plan that really highlights where their emotional growth and their competency growth can happen, you're going to lose self-awareness. And then you got like a feedback culture, right? If you're getting consistent feedback from a manager or a leader or a leadership coach, right? Leadership coaching is very powerful. That's a layer. But let's scale it down as we scale down the ladder to the micro. And what I find, Tullio and Stephen, in the micro level, it's the personal growth work people do. And something I've used with a lot of people I coach is called the midnight mirror. So it's a real practical way to say, okay, how do I grow my own emotional intelligence, my own self-awareness? And the midnight mirror really starts with some commitment to reflection at the end of your day. Like at the end of the day, are you looking in the mirror and are you reflecting on you? And I encourage people to start with something that's not self-defeating, but what are you proud about with your day? What are you proud about that relates to you as a person and your values? Not necessarily your accomplishments, but what do you value about what you've done? What are you proud about? Then I invite them to reflect. And reflect is looking about where were some of the emotional triggers or the emotional wakes that came during the day, and how did they impact you? And then reflect on that. Where was there like a, kind of like a wave? We'll use the California term, like where did the waves come from emotions, and kind of reflect on that. And then ultimately, when you reflect on where those emotional waves come, you can start to process them. So some emotional intelligence is about managing your emotions, but I call it more about processing them. And processing doesn't always happen in real time unless you do the work in advance. You don't walk in a gym and get in shape. You got to do the work. So in that midnight mirror, when you reflect on that, and a lot of times it's kind of releasing those emotions and releasing the disappointments or frustrations so they don't carry over to the next day. And that self-awareness can be very valuable. And, then I invite people to now take your mindset and kind of reframe events and activities that happen during the day that cause some tension or some impulse or, created this space where you didn't regulate what you said or how you interacted. And it becomes that component of it is kind of reframing your mindset, reshifting your story. So in that midnight mirror, it's a powerful, what I've seen tool that I've used with myself personally, because I needed a lot of looks in the midnight mirror and a lot of days I need to reflect. And then also to people I coach. And at the end of that, you create some resolution, you create some closure to it. And you start to take note of where are the places, what were the events, what were the activities that caused some tension points in my day, and how did I respond? And then what are different pathways I can respond to them? So I look at it, and that's kind of a space to think about self-awareness. As a coach, I'm always trying to push people forward in terms of their growth journey, and taking it from macro, if that's in place, all down to the micro, the daily work you do, you can really develop some strong self-awareness skills. And then it's a matter of putting in the work and the commitment to make some changes so that you could show up your best and make an impact.
Tullio, I think we're really helping our listeners in the last 3 episodes develop this end of day practice, because we've had, 125 guests on, but the last 3 have specifically mentioned this sort of end of day practice of some type, and they're all a little bit different. So we're developing this this choice that you have there. You can run with it however you want to.
Mine is called the personal reflection, but I'd love the midnight mirror. I have to come up with a cooler name.
Well, you got reflection in there. So
interestingly enough, all that practice is actually rooted on very ancient practice called Shuvah, which goes back to biblical times of doing this kind of practice. So it's very interesting. It's been working for thousands of years, that introspection. What I've learned, Quinn, is that really comes down to who our identity is. And what I mean by that, it's a combination of our beliefs and our habits. And so over the years, I've come to really appreciate neuroscience because of the ability to change beliefs through mantras, etc., but also the micro little habits that you do along the way that convince your brain to say, this is who I am now, right? It's like, so it's not these big leaps. That's why people go to these weekends and they spend $5,000, and then 2 weeks later they're right back to who they were, because nothing happens through like these big jumps. It's micro little consistent, persistent habits. And so I'm just curious, like, what are some of the key habits that people could practice to develop more emotional regulation or emotional intelligence that you've seen work?
Yeah. Well, let's use an analogy here about the regulation part, because this is an important component of it. And so the regulation part, if we look at an analogy of it, is think of yourself as a car. Think of yourself as a high performance car, and your thoughts are like the gasoline you put in the car. Now, your emotions are like the pistons. And as those pistons fire, combustion happens, and they move you into action, right? They move you forward into action, into it. So that's the cycle that we work through as a car. Now, what the key thing is, and I love what you said, Tullio, is that when you talk about beliefs, the engine itself is your beliefs. So self-regulation has its real powerful most moments on really identifying what are the beliefs that are really the central part of your engine that ultimately affect how those pistons fire. And I think that's an important space to get people thinking through, because one of the most powerful questions I end up asking when I'm navigating coaching is, if there's an emotional wake or emotional journey someone's on and they're getting stuck in certain emotional space, it's what belief is driving that emotion. And that really puts a reflective space back to like, whoa, what is that belief that's driving it? What is my mindset? And is that really serving me or my people? And if you can challenge that, well, you can actually have power of choice to choose a different belief. It's something I kind of coached you quite a bit. It's part of the book Growth Time. It's part of the section, which I call Power of Beliefs, that helps people navigate through those. So that's the place of self-regulation that I think is very impactful. Now, practical habits, that's a different component. I've seen in coaching, it's the preparation that leads to the game time performance. So it's not what you do when you play the game. And a performer, pro athlete here, you just didn't show up and think you're going to score or shoot or perform well. It just didn't happen. It's the preparation you put in. So habits is really some of the work you put in ahead of time. And so what I look to, as far as you mentioned identity, Tullio, and I think that's it's often one of the main reasons why we fail to regulate, because our identity is sometimes wrapped up in things that are fleeting, or it can be moved, or it can be shaken. And so getting people to get clarity on their identity, and that's another place I'm very big on, right? And there's certain processes to walk people through, and I cover that too in Growth Time, the power of you. And that's the first section of the book. And it kind of talks about how to get clear on your mission and how to get clear on your specific values, how to get clear on a motivator. There's much out there that I think the empathetic generation and even probably your audience will resonate with. It's like, yeah, know your why, know your motivator. But the work it takes at a deep level to know a clear mission-driven statement on your purpose, man, that takes some work. But when you dive into that and you then create the habit of reflecting on what that major motivating mission statement is that carries you through. So some of the habits is doing the work and then identifying those growth gaps. And I think when those take into place, man, it creates such an impactful journey, for people. I recently had to kind of share my own story, really a little bit for a thought. In my early 20s, I was probably in identity crisis mode and not even aware of it. I had this space that how I performed dictated how I felt. And that becomes such a challenging scope. And I coached and navigated through personally and coached thousands of sessions through it. But that performance space was a limiter for me. And so what would happen is I lost ability to self-regulate. When you look back at emotional intelligence, I had beliefs about me, myself, and my performance that could very shift day to day, right? You have a good day, you have a bad day. You feel like you're winning, you feel like you're losing. And well, that affects your emotions, your ability to self-regulate. So finding identity and clarity on me, my values, my purpose, even in a deeper level, my spiritual journey and my faith and how getting clarity on what that looked like as a young person in my early to mid 20s was central to helping to learn to be more emotionally intelligent in my life story. So yeah, I go a little deeper into that, but you might get me to tear up, man. I can be a crier sometimes, man, if I start sharing too much of that growth story there of transformation.
Well, I think that part about trying to figure out why you believe something, a lot of that goes back to like when you were age 7 to 12 or something during these years, when you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with in life at that time, and you end up dealing with it as like an 8-year-old would. And you sort of build that kind of habit or those defenses, whatever it is, but you don't end up looking at it until you're, 30 years later, if you're lucky, to have that.
Before you turn 9, they're hardwired, those beliefs. So
it's not an easy thing to go back to. It's like, why do I believe this? Because really, sometimes it's something that was, decades ago that impacted you. Hey, Tullio, we've got a couple audience questions. Should we go to one right now?
Let's go through them. First question from a LinkedIn user: how has emotional intelligence evolved in business coaching over the years, especially with remote and hybrid work models? Great question.
Yeah. So emotional intelligence is coming much more to the forefront. I mean, it's work that was done 25 years ago, and I love Daniel Goleman and the work he did. But what's evolved is cultural, and times have changed. And what I mean by that is, the older generation was more of this kind of Bill Belichick, do your job generation. Like you did it, you just got the what to go do, and the expectation was you go do it. It's the what. And so the evolution of our Gen Z millennial, fabulous, awesome generation that's rising up, they're 60% of the workforce. They have a different feel. They want to be connected to mission, values, things that make an impact. They'll even take about, one Harris poll study said, like $10,000 or less to be connected to a mission-driven value company and a culture that is connected to that. So the cultural shift from the do your job to like just the what, it now shifts to the why. And it's different. And so you see this kind of cultural shift, and people have to adapt. Leaders have to adapt. We got to get connected more to the why behind the what. And this is bonus material. It's not to answer your question, but the thought is that when you lead, and there's leaders on this call listening, are you communicating the why behind the what in your messaging to your team? Because if you don't connect the emotion to what you're asking to go do, there's a disconnect. You're really just kind of activating one side of the brain. So think that part through. But how does it work with hybrid workers or people that are remote? This is great because I recently coached a kind of higher level executive, bigger company person through this. He was kind of going through this journey, and this will be relevant to what you're asking, is that he had a team member under him that was really disengaged. And his mindset as a leader was frustrated, disconnected, And he's like, man, the guy should just do his job. And so he got some feedback from his boss, which is part of kind of the micro level of self-awareness. And we went to work on emotional intelligence. And out of that, it was about how he believed and thought people should act in the current generation, and having to shift the way he viewed it to help his emotions, which were just frustration, be regulated. And what he came up with is really important to like what you're asking about hybrid generation. He said, hey, I've got to get more connected to my people. And so he started to set up regular calls, not just phone or text or messaging, but video conference calls with his people. He started to be more engaged in their one-on-one meetings, in their group meetings. And there was certain spaces that were kind of cues for him to be sure that he was regulating and connected and in an empathetic place. But in the workplace, it's still important. Everything can't be done by technology. It's got to be interactive. So if you're in that hybrid space and you still have to grow emotional intelligence, and maybe not sometimes more the physical, like camaraderie you may see, but that connection is hugely important. And being socially skilled and relationship skilled, aware in those conversations, even more a premium skill set, as opposed to when you're not like reading body language is close or dispositions, or you maybe got to blurt out back screen, you know what's going on behind somebody. So very important. So yeah, a long space, but wanted to give you a good answer for that question. It was a great question.
I love it. And I want to frame the next question from the audience here, because I think it's important. And you said something critical. Don't just say what needs to be done, explain why. And that's really what empathy is all about. Is understanding the intrinsic emotion or the need behind the transaction. Otherwise, everything is very transactional, just feels cold. It's like going to buy a suit, but what you want it to do for you is what really matters. You know, maybe you're going for a job interview and you want to feel powerful or confident. The transactional buying a suit is just a transaction, but the person who understands your need is the one you're going to buy from. So this is the question. We have another question from the audience. In your coaching, how do you help clients improve their empathy skills, especially when leading diverse teams across cultures or generations? Again, talking to some of the things you mentioned, taking the time to explain the why. Again, that's really empathy, isn't it? How do you help develop that skill?
So empathy really has its origins in a coaching context, and coaching is a skill set. If you're a leader, I'd invest in improving your skill set as a coach, because you learn certain skill sets that open up this pathways to get further into your emotional intelligence growth. But empathy as a skill is developed through the context of listening. So listening is this key context. It's a coaching context, and there's three kind of levels of listening that you work through. The first level of listening is where we spend, unfortunately, about 80% of our day, and that's called eternal listening. Internal listening is where we're reflecting what you said and applying it to me, how it impacts me, what impact it may have on my decisions, what I'm going to do. It's kind of like the internal me space. And there's times for that, right? If you're in the airport, you need to know what the flight you're going to go on. You need to internally listen to know where you're going. But when we operate under that, we're self-focused. The empathy kicks in when we develop the second layer, which is focused listening. And focused listening, another word people use, is active listening. That's where you evoke curiosity, you evoke awareness to the other person. You're learning to say, I'm actively listening, and even clarifying what people are saying. And doing that, you start to put yourself in their position or their shoes, or the framework of where they're sitting. So it's an important context of empathy. It starts with growing in level 2 active listening. We'll save level 3 for a different day. That's kind of like 3-point shots in basketball. We'll get to that at a different point. But like that level 2 is the biggest mover for growing in empathy. And you can be intentional with that. That's a skill you can learn. It gets out the self-focus and says, gosh, I've got to be more curious, and I've got to actively listen with follow-up questions, a sincere wanting to understand another person's story or plight. That evokes empathy rather than operating internal listening. So as an example, I haven't gone to this depth personally with it, but I've coached people through just the growth zone of it. And what they did was they kind of tracked it every night. So there's your growth work, right? Go through and get better at that empathy skill by saying, okay, at night, do a reflection as part of your midnight mirror and say, the conversations I had today, where did I spend most of my time listening? Was I internalizing it about how it impacted me? Or when I engaged with people, was I curious about what was behind what they were saying? What was deeper than what they were thinking? Was I curious enough and willing to ask them a little further depth question? Did I show that I understood why, or asked why they were doing what they were doing as a motivator? So you could grow in that space, but that's how you start to grow some empathy. It just doesn't happen because you think about the word empathy. It's really the growth work. And yeah, you're talking to a growth coach. So of course, that's what he's going to say, right? Put in the growth work, get that commitment, even do it for a week. And I guarantee people go, oh, wow, you're a little more empathetic. You're starting to really listen and be curious about me. Watch the change.
Both of your answers to this audience questions kind of use the word intentional in some way or another in there. And I think that's really a lot of what we're trying to help companies with, with our Bliss methodology and everything, is building these sort of systems that are intentionally building kindness into what you do. So in terms of emotional intelligence, how can leaders build it into systems rather than relying on, just that random personality trait or something that can, vary from person to person. Some people are excellent at it. Some people are, too busy to even think about it sometimes, but you've really got to have these intentional systems in place, I think.
Yeah. And I think the more you're intentional and more you follow through with some of those systems, what you've seen probably too in your guys' work, Tullio and Stephen, is the more impact it makes. So, one of the things at the highest level, and I take it from the big, we can work down from there as a thought, but one part of emotional intelligence is motivation and connecting emotion to positive action. That's a kind of a precept of emotional intelligence. So if I'm a leader, if I'm managing and leading people, or I'm growing in that space, how often are we speaking to the mission and what we're moving towards? Am I connecting people's emotion to what we're doing and why we're doing it? I've sat in plenty of rooms and feedback cycles, and there's always a what needs to happen. But if it's not connected to the motivator, you lose that space, you lose that capacity. So that's scalable though. If you can start to get leaders to talk about and connecting to the mission and the vision of what we're accomplishing, great. Quick example is this. I cut my teeth years ago in the fitness industry and just doing sales. And sales will teach you a lot about emotional intelligence if you want to make some sales. You got to read people. But performance-based culture was about numbers and statistics. I shifted that within my team. And I said, hey, these are the results, but each person we start on the membership and their fitness represents a life change. So we start talking about every life change that we started that day, and we celebrated life changes. So the action we connected to was the result of, hey, we wanted to sign people up. That's the profit part, but we put the people first. And we started with intentionally sowing in mission and the higher purpose of what we're achieving, what we're trying to accomplish. So we'd have people come texting me I changed another life. I changed another life. And that's where you can get movement. So that's one scalable, system. The second one, I'll kind of, give, and it's really developing within your culture a feedback culture. So feedback cultures are intentionally geared to helping personal growth and developing psychological safety in a safe zone for growth. When done well, right? When done well, you could scale that and develop emotional intelligence and empathy and personal growth by developing a powerful feedback culture. The best organizations have powerful feedback cultures. So I would say those two would be, from a high level, really practical ways you could bring in a scalable system into your communication and leadership, and then practicality, how you're developing the feedback culture and all the great work that goes into, and the effort it takes. That's not easy to develop that culture and that mindset. All elevates emotional intelligence within your people.
I love it. I mean, it's very systems thinking too, because purpose is part of a system. And so you tackle that, and feedback loops part of a system. When Tullio and I, way back when, we went through these companies that had scandals, it was those two areas, I think, that fell apart the most. It wasn't aligned to whatever they're doing, a higher purpose of some type, is aligned to, like you said, the transactional numbers versus that higher purpose. And then if there wasn't a healthy feedback loop in there,
Yeah.
people just didn't want to hear it, or, they would bury whatever the bad news was, or the bad feedback they would get.
And creating shareholder value is not a purpose, folks. That's not a purpose. Okay. Speaking of purpose, let's shift gears as we come up to wrapping up here. McKinsey has reported that employees who find purpose in their work are significantly more engaged and resilient. How does emotional intelligence help leaders connect daily actions to a deeper purpose? And what's your deeper purpose behind what you're doing?
Yeah. I'll kind of throw the first pitch, the second pitch, I'll kind of hit first for you, Tullio. The clarity on me is as a coach, where I'm at in my kind of mission moving thought is to really empower mission movers to change the world they influence. And I do that by helping people, through coaching, training, and education. So that's kind of like my mission. That's kind of like my needle mover. And I kind of have this space of helping people navigate life, leadership, and business. That's kind of the theme of Growth Time. How can I empower you, whether it's an individual, group, or organization, to change the world you influence, and using the skills of coaching through life, leadership, and business? So that's kind of the mover for me. For people that are, trying to connect with purpose in the workplace, there's two layers behind that, right? If you're trying to connect with purpose, if you're on this and you're thinking, man, what's the real meaning? What's the real value? You have your individual purpose, which that helps empower you to stay engaged in your daily life and your daily walk and your daily journey as a human being. If you're connected to a higher level purpose and mission that's clear for you, that brings a whole different level of confidence. And we need confidence in this world. And so that's crucial. The other way is, we kind of talked about this a minute ago, is how are you connecting with the purpose and the mission of the people of the team you're on? And if you're connected with that, you tend to walk in a higher level of emotional availability, which relates to emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I think both those, that personal, purpose and that organizational purpose, both of them, if you tend to try and focus on how you truly are in service to others in both of those, I think that's a good way to find that purpose. If you don't know, like you're out there right now, you're listening to this podcast while you're crunching some numbers or something, maybe you're not understanding a purpose of whatever you're doing. It's like, well, how am I truly in service to people? How am I really helping people? And I think that helps you find your way more often than not when it comes to this. It's hard. I get it. I mean, people go the whole lifetime not really finding it, in their life to find what their why is out there. So, Quinn, one question we ask on this show that I want to get into a little bit is some form of this. It's, what role does love play in business?
At the highest level, there's probably a couple of themes that run through humanity, right? You have faith, you have hope, and you have love. And, faith, and they apply to business as well, right? Someone took a chance, someone had faith and started a business. They have hope of what could happen, and they love what they're doing. So the greatest, though, is love. And the love and understanding love and growing in love is probably one of the greatest challenges we face as human beings, is what exactly does love look like? But we're aware of that when we feel love. When we receive love, we can give love. And there's context to it. In the business culture, you have to love your people. It's people over profits. Profits may drive your mission, but people drive the profits. And if you don't have a love for people and the growth for people, or wanting to see their investment in serving your company, your dreams, your goals, and you don't have a love for them, you're going to have a tough time with emotional intelligence, and you're going to struggle long term to make that impact in the people's lives that you're created to make. So I think love has every place to do with the business world, with our personal lives. It's probably a quest we're all on, and we're trying to figure out, hey, how do we incorporate love in the work we do? Because it can't just be like love everything goes, and it can't be love is just tough love. There's a pendulum swing of toughness and tenderness, and there's that journey. But if that's a forefront of the way you're viewing your work and how you serve others, that's a power place to come from, power place to come from. And I love that you guys incorporate it. I've never heard of a model where building love into scalable systems is a component of it. And thinking about how love impacts people and businesses, I think it's fantastic.
I love so you mentioned faith, hope, and love as, these sort of, I guess, virtues. If you think about what's the opposite of those, it's like cynicism, fear, right? And so I think, doesn't that sound like a lot of where the corporate culture is right now? Like we talked about for, 70% of the people in the US right now, it's something related to that kind of that cynicism and fear. It's that opposite of what you're talking about, right?
The opposite of that is manipulation.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Quinn, we ask all of our guests to give something practical that the audience can take away, something they can practice right away for someone who wants to improve their emotional intelligence this year. Because it's not a 1 month long initiative. Let's call it the entire year. We're 2 months in, got 10 more months to go. Someone wants to really build and improve their emotional intelligence. What's one practical thing they can start doing and keep doing that you would recommend?
Yeah. I would say the one practical thing, and I'm probably a little biased here with my thought, but I've seen the results of it. I would say get into growth time. I'll kind of got a copy near me. I'd say get into the journey of growth time. Go through this space. It's about how to navigate life in 3 simple kind of growth zones and how to navigate your leadership. I promise you, you go through that growth time journey and you level up your growth time story and put in the work, you will absolutely see a significant change in your life, in your world, and how your emotional intelligence grows over the next year.
Wonderful. Okay, so for those who want to know where to pick up the book, want to learn more about you, where should they go?
Great way. You can always connect with me on LinkedIn. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, Quinn Harwood, just by connecting, you get access to a free weekly newsletter I call Monday Movers Mindset. So Monday's for movers, and you need a fresh mindset each week. So connecting to me on LinkedIn, you'll automatically get connected to that. Shoot me a DM. As far as grabbing the book, it's on Amazon. And that resource is also available on my website, coachqharwood.com, with other tools to help you really reach your potential and be the best 21st century leader you can be.
Quinn, thanks for joining us today. Thank you to our audience and the questions. And, so to our listeners, I guess, consider how, like those elements we talked about, faith, hope, love, and the opposite components of those, how those are impacting your work today. And really try and dig into maybe a little bit of a higher purpose if you can with what you do. We know that's what we're talking about with the Generation Z and millennials. They're coming on board. A lot of the work that we did in advance helps the gravity here, of course, but they're getting to those places much quicker than we did because of that gravity. Quinn and I were both like Gen X, right? So took us a little while probably compared to the younger generations these days to get there. But thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.